So after reading the book of Exodus, it is clear to me that Pharaoh is basically Gandalf from The Lord of the Rings, but evil.
You shall not pass!
What follows are my initial thoughts and reactions to this book of the Bible. I have not done any outside research regarding the more challenging or problematic passages of Christian scripture. Therefore, do not take whatever criticisms I may make in this video as my final word on the passage or verse in question. I am very likely going to be doing a Bible Revisited series addressing my different issues with the Bible, book by book, after conducting ample outside research. So now, without further ado, let's jump into the review.
So the book of Exodus is the second book of the Old Testament, and it was, as far as we know, it was written by Moses, and it is telling the story of Moses and how he came to lead the Israelites out of Egypt and out of Pharaoh's grasp. My initial impressions of the book of Exodus was it was an absolutely fascinating book. This book was really mystical, you know, with the plagues and with like all the stuff surrounding Moses' staff, it turning into a snake. It was magical. This book was very magical. The book was also quite brutal. Far more brutal than I remembered it being when I read it years ago. And I will say that this book was very challenging for me. There's a number of things in this book that I am uncomfortable with being in the Bible. And so overall, would I say that I like the book of Exodus? I would say that the book of Exodus is very interesting. It's definitely worth a read, for sure. The whole Bible is worth a read. But I will say that I did not walk away from reading the book of Exodus more confident in Christianity. In fact, I felt less confident. I need to look into other people's explanations for some of these challenging passages that we're going to go over in this review. But as of right now, after reading the book of Exodus, it was quite a startling book. Definitely upset my equilibrium in not the best way. So those were my general thoughts about the book of Exodus. Now let's talk about more specifically about the passages in the book of Exodus that I thought were compelling or interesting or challenging. First, right off the bat, I mean, I'm not going to really go into it a whole lot, but Moses in the burning bush, it's a very famous scene in the book of Exodus. Very cool. God speaking to Moses through a bush, telling him, hey, this is what your responsibility is. This is your mission in life. And then I also want to talk about Exodus chapter 4 a little bit, because this is where you really are introduced to like the more magical displays of miraculousness with Moses' staff. God tells him to, throw down his staff and it becomes a snake. And then Moses grabs it by the tail and it turns back into a staff. And then this is all in preparation for Moses to display these signs for Pharaoh, to try and convince Pharaoh to let his people go. But these are just kind of the preliminary proceedings of going through that sort of stuff. And it's all very interesting. I mean, like, Moses at one point puts his hand in his cloak, takes it out, it's leprous, and he puts it back in his cloak, and takes it out, and it's cured again. All of it's very fascinating. It's very, it's straight up magic. I will say that it is somewhat hard to believe, but then again, everything came out of nothing, which is also hard to believe. I do want to talk about specifically verse 21. This is, I don't know what this is about. I'll just read it. The Lord said to Moses, when you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the wonders I have given you the power to do. But I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. Now, throughout the book of Exodus, God says, I will harden Pharaoh's heart, blah, all this sort of stuff. It doesn't seem to me, this seems like a violation of free will. Now, scholars, experts out there, if any of you are out there watching this video, please in the comment section below illuminate my stupidity, if in fact it is stupidity. But it seems like God is purposefully manipulating Pharaoh, like throughout the book, to harden his heart against his will, which seems like God's almost deceiving Pharaoh in a way, which seems like out of character for God. It just seems like a contradictory thing, because if God hardens somebody's heart, like intent, like he makes their heart hard, then I don't know. Like it doesn't seem like Pharaoh really had much of a choice to be a good guy throughout this entire book, because God wouldn't let him because of destiny, which is also a question of free will too. All I know is that that verse in particular kind of messed with me. I also want to talk about verse 24. I'll read that really quick. It's only short. At a lodging place on the way, the Lord met Moses and was about to kill him. But Zipporah took a flint knife, cut off her son's foreskin, and touched Moses' feet with it. Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me, she said. So the Lord let him alone. At that time, she said bridegroom of blood, referring to circumcision. Now, this passage is pretty crazy in that it says God was about to kill him, even though he had just, he'd been prophesying that Moses was to do all of this stuff in Egypt. It's very bizarre. Now, as I understand it, during this time, you had to be circumcised in order to be a Jew, a proper Jew, and the custom was, if you don't get circumcised as a man, then you've cut yourself off from Israel and God and all that sort of stuff. That's what it seems like, anyways. That's what my Life Application Bible says about this particular passage, and that's why they cut off Moses' son's foreskin to save him and Moses. But I don't know. It's one of those things where you read it and you're like, it seems a little harsh. And then, I don't know, like God could have just said, hey, do this, not I'm about to kill you. Moving on to chapter 7, I do want to talk about chapter 7, verses 10 through 12. Really fascinating. I'm just going to read the whole passage because it's very mysterious as to who Pharaoh's magicians were and what kind of power they had. I'll just read it. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron threw his staff down in front of Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a snake. Pharaoh then summoned wise men and sorcerers, and the Egyptian magicians also did the same things by their secret arts. Each one threw down his staff, and it became a snake. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Yet Pharaoh's heart became hard, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. Now, what's fascinating about this is not only did Aaron, using Moses' staff, throw the staff down and turn into a snake, what's so fascinating is the Egyptians were able to do the same thing. I just find this very fascinating, very cool. Where did they get their magical powers? I don't know. How did they were able to do the same thing that Aaron did? It's like, well, what? Now we get to the plagues. Now I can't go through every single plague. All I will say that the plagues, like the plague of frogs, the plague on livestock, the plague of flies, the plague of gnats. I mean, I'll talk about like just every one of them in general. The plague of hail, the plague of locusts. All of these plagues are so like they're super cool. Like to read it, like this. I cannot believe, like Ridley Scott made a movie called Exodus, Gods and Kings or something a couple years ago. He did such a terrible job, even though he had the best material to make an incredible movie. The plagues are like such a crazy idea. And it would be such like, it needs to be like a horror, like that sort of movie needed to be like a horror movie, like almost. Because they are horrific plagues. And they're all very fascinating, and it's all about like Moses warns Pharaoh, hey, this is what God's going to do. And Pharaoh's like, no. And he suffers the consequences. And then, of course, there's all that hardening heart stuff that I don't understand that goes along with it. But the point of the plagues is that oftentimes we're like Pharaoh in that we know that we shouldn't do something. We do it anyways, and then we suffer the consequences, and yet we're almost surprised, but we never learn. We just keep on repeating. That's what I got from the plagues in particular. Now, there is one thing I do want to point out, and that is the plague on livestock. It seems like a contradiction to me, because the plague on livestock involves all of the Egyptian livestock dying. It says all the livestock of the Egyptians died, but not one animal belonging to the Israelites died. Now, it's possible that we aren't given all of the information here in the book, to the contextual information to make this make sense, but on the next page, it says, give an order now to bring your livestock and everything you have in the field to a place of shelter, because the hail will fall on every man and animal that has not been brought in and is still out in the field, and they will die. Why did Moses tell Pharaoh this if all of his livestock had just died like a couple days before? Like, maybe that wasn't literally all of the livestock of the Egyptians died, but it doesn't say. It just like, on one page it says all the livestock died. And on the next page it says bring your livestock in, or else they're going to all die. Well, I thought they were already dead. Perhaps, again, perhaps I haven't been given all the contextual information, but it seems like possibly a contradiction. And this is Exodus chapter 9, if anyone wants to look this up and explain to me why I'm stupid or whatever. Now, I do want to talk for a moment about the plague on the firstborn, which... if you have read the book, then you know what I'm talking about. But if you haven't read the book, the plague on the firstborn is a worrisome idea to me, because these firstborn children, even though they're the children of the Egyptians who are opposed to the Israelites, they're innocent kids, and God allows them to be killed. I don't... Now, like, there's some nuance to this and that. Well, you could argue that God is taking these kids away painlessly up to heaven, where they'll have, they'll be safe and whatever. You could argue that, and I see that, and the punishment is really on the Egyptians, those that are there that are stubborn-hearted and will not yield to the Israelites' wants. And I see that that's like the I think that's the main message, like the main idea is that these children are being punished. It's the parents, it's the civilization, and the kids are actually okay because they're up in heaven and whatever. But, well, I don't even know, because the thing is I don't know, there's not an age that's given. So these the firstborn in Egypt could have been in any age, and it's like, the actions of Pharaoh cannot, you can't punish everybody in a civilization because of the actions of one man and of some of his officials. It just doesn't seem right, and it's a very worrisome idea. And again, scholars, thinkers, whatever, if anybody's watching it and who knows how to explain this, explain it in the comment section below. And briefly, I want to talk about the, Moses parting the Red Sea and bringing the Israelites through it, and then the sea rolling over the Egyptians. Great scene, one of the most iconic scenes in all of history, all of literature, of, anything. It's iconic, and reading it was just as interesting as, I always thought it would be. Even though I've read this before, I still found it just as amazing as I always have. Now, another thing I would like to address, this is something I got out of Exodus quite well. I realized that a lot of my discussion regarding Exodus in this particular video is somewhat critical and or confused. But I will say that one of the things I really got out of Exodus is the Israelites complain throughout the entire book. Why'd you lead us out into the desert, Moses? God has surely abandoned us, all this sort of stuff. Even though God gave them manna to eat for 40 years until they came to a land that was settled. I will say that I've always heard something weird. That desert wasn't that big, so they must have really just been going in circles for forever out there in the desert eating manna, which is like God's food for them. But the Israelites, even though God had kept them alive for all that time, they would still complain, why did you bring us out of Egypt to make us and our children and our livestock die of thirst? And what I got out of that is that that's what people do. That's what people do in America. That's what, anytime something goes wrong in their lives, it's like, why? Well, surely you've abandoned us. Maybe you're not even real, blah, 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 blah. Anytime things don't go according to plan, people, society complains. We have so much in America, and yet the first time something goes slightly wrong, we're all like, why? Nothing's real. Nothing matters. Society, burn it to the ground. And, so nothing's changed in humanity. Everyone is still a complainer, as they have always been, and, I don't know. For me, that's one of the things I've been trying to do in my life is just be like Carter, stop complaining. Be thankful for what you have. You have a lot more than most people in the entire world. Now, I do want to read this one passage. This passage is so cool. This is Exodus chapter 17. This is dealing with the Israelites fighting the Amalekites. And I have to read this because basically what's happening is Joshua is fighting the Amalekites, and Moses raises his hands as to, to have an effect on the war. I have to read this. It says, verse 10, "So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side, one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword." That is so cool, and that's never been in a movie as far as I know. Like, they should make an Exodus movie where it's not just about him leaving, the Israelites leaving Egypt. It should also be about the traveling and all the stuff that happened afterwards. Like, that would be just such a cool scene in a movie. Like, come on, Hollywood, come on. Just, when you make the next Exodus movie you make it on the whole book of Exodus, please. Now, I'm not going to read this next passage since it is quite long, but Exodus chapter 18, verse 13 to 27, I think is quite a compelling passage because it involves basically Moses, basically being a judge for the people. They bring their cases to him regarding God, and he tells them what God believes. He's like an intermediary between God and the people, much like the Pope is supposed to be, I think. I don't know, it's very interesting because the Catholic Church has always been odd to me, and I've always wondered where they got their idea for like a Pope, which apparently though, like, their idea for the Pope is like in Peter, which makes no sense to me. But Moses, in a way, was kind of he seemed to be acting like the Pope in this situation, in that he was an intermediary between the people and God, and he was the judge of everything regarding what everyone should do, what God says to them to do. I don't know, it's just very fascinating. And now we come to the 10 Commandments, Exodus chapter 20. Now, I found, the 10 Commandments. I think I'm just going to probably read through, because honestly, a lot of people don't even realize what all the 10 Commandments are. And there are a couple things I want to address in this chapter. It's a short chapter, so I'm just going to read it from the top. "And God spoke all of these words. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments." That particular commandment, that's, like, the commandment itself is fine, but the stuff about punishing the sin of the fathers to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, that sounds like North Korea, we gotta say, because we all object to North Korea, and yet, it's like, I don't know, it just doesn't seem, dare I say, fair to punish the children, the descendants, the generations after the father, who was the horrible person. Like, if Hitler ever had kids, I don't think the kids should be punished for what Hitler did. I think Hitler should be punished for what Hitler did, and it end with him, unless the kids also do something. "You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name." That's, taking the Lord's name in vain. It makes sense, "Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your manservant or maidservant, nor your animals, nor the alien within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his manservant or maidservant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. So that was the Ten Commandments. Perhaps one of the most famous pieces of doctrine to ever come out of the Bible. So congratulations if you didn't know that. Now Exodus chapter 21 is, this is where things get pretty challenging. I mean, the whole book of Exodus has been challenging for me, but this particular chapter is where things go from somewhat challenging to more challenging. Exodus chapter 21 verses 1 to 11 has to do with Hebrew servants, slaves, that sort of thing. And I don't know, I encourage you to read it. I really, it seems like slavery is never endorsed in the Bible, but it does talk about it quite a bit and has parameters for it. And if there's parameters for something, it almost seems as if it's okay. I don't know. But that particular passage is very interesting. I encourage whoever reads it to research it and try and see what scholars and people say, because I need to research it. But I don't know. It was just, I was conflicted by it quite a bit. Also in Exodus chapter 21, verse 20, I'm just going to read it. This goes, well, it's 20 and 21. This is quite a problem for me, I think. If a man beats his male or female slave with a rod, and the slave dies as a direct result, he must be punished. But he is not to be punished if the slave gets up after a day or two, since the slave is his property. This seems egregious to me, because it's basically saying that you can mistreat your slaves, beat the crap out of them, as long as they don't die, and that they are your property. I don't know how to explain that away. Seems like a problem to me. Seems like not necessarily an endorsement of slavery, but it's a weird law. This is all having to do with Hebrew law, by the way. Since the slave is his property, it's acknowledging that you can own someone, and that, now obviously in the 21st century, that seems inherently wrong. And it seems to be in contradiction to a lot of the Bible in some ways. Now, granted, slavery was different back then than what we saw here in America in the 1800s and 1700s, but it's still slavery, and that seems like pretty harsh. Pretty messed up, to be honest with you. Now I want to talk about something that I found was really good, which was Exodus chapter 21, verses 22 to 25. To reading 22. If men who are fighting hit a pregnant woman and she gives birth prematurely, but there is no serious injury, the offender must be fined whatever the woman's husband demands and the court allows. But if there is serious injury, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. Now that seems pretty harsh too, but honestly it seems pretty justified. Yeah. Don't hit pregnant women. Now Exodus chapter 22 is a mix, I found, of like both really good things and some challenging things. Exodus chapter 22 verse 18. Do not allow a sorceress to live. I assume that was like a witch or some evil woman. That's interesting. I don't know exactly what that means. Witches and sorcerers and everything always been mysterious throughout history. But that's, I don't know, I just wanted to touch on that just because it's just one of those compelling sayings from the past. Verse 20, chapter 22. Whoever sacrifices to any god other than the Lord must be destroyed. Now, if you were to take this today, it would almost seem like you would be going after Muslims and stuff because they sacrifice to, they serve a different god. And while you can disagree with them, I don't know if they should be straight up destroyed. But I don't know what destroyed means in this verse. It could just mean converted, because most of the Bible has to do with conversion. And so, yeah, I guess I don't know whether I just don't know what that exactly means. If anyone knows exactly what that means, please illuminate. And then also verse 21, do not mistreat an alien or oppress him, for you were aliens in Egypt. America needs to read that verse more than we do already, because there's a lot of immigrants here, and some people have a really, really bad attitude towards them, and yeah, so we should not mistreat or oppress them. I don't really want to get into immigration, but it's a complicated matter, but we definitely shouldn't be the way we are in some ways. I love the passage, Exodus chapter 22, verse 25 through 27. This is a beautiful passage. I think it speaks for itself. Verse 25. If you lend money to one of my people among you who is needy, do not be like a moneylender. Charge him no interest. If you take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, return it to him by sunset, because his cloak is the only covering he has for his body. What else will he sleep in? When he cries out to me, I will hear him, for I am compassionate. That's just a beautiful passage, I think. Beautiful. Another passage that I loved in the book of Exodus, Exodus chapter 23, verse 4 through 9. This is beautiful. I mean, again, it speaks for itself, but this old wisdom needs to make a comeback. Verse 4. If you come across your enemy's ox or donkey wandering off, be sure to take it back to him. If you see the donkey of someone who hates you fallen down under its load, do not leave it there. Be sure you help him with it. Do not deny justice to your poor people in their lawsuits. Have nothing to do with a false charge, and do not put an innocent or honest person to death, for I will not acquit the guilty. Do not accept a bribe, for a bribe blinds those who see and twist the words of the righteous. Do not oppress an alien. You yourselves know how it feels to be aliens, because you were aliens in Egypt. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so I had to move my operations in here because some things came up involving the airport right in the middle of me filming that I had to leave, come back, and now I can't really do what I was, can't really do my video out in the living room because there are other people that live here that are now here when they weren't here earlier. Yeah, anyways, now we're in my bedroom. And back to the review of Exodus, I would like to talk about Exodus chapter 31, verse 15, which is talking about the Sabbath. Now, I really like the idea of the Sabbath. I think I need to observe the Sabbath because I work all the time. Whenever I have a bit of free time, I'm like, oh, well, now I can do that one thing I was planning on doing days from now, and I can do it now. I have a mentality that is really not healthy when it comes to, like, I just don't know how to relax by myself. If there's other people around, I can relax, but if it's just me, I feel like I'm obligated to be doing something, and it kind of drives me insane. So I like the idea of the Sabbath, but verse 15, it says, for 6 days work is to be done, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day must be put to death. To me, and I, again, maybe I'm an idiot, but it seems, I don't know, it seems, number one, it seems quite harsh. And number two, Jesus, one of the things that he did was he made the point in the New Testament that people were taking the Sabbath too seriously, to the point where if you picked grain on that day for yourself, then that's considered work. And he was like, that's not true. That you shouldn't be punished for not observing the Sabbath for doing something as little as that. It's like, he's basically like, guys, stop taking everything so seriously. It's just the Sabbath is a good thing. Just don't pervert it into being this insane thing. But verse 15 seems kind of crazy. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day must be put to death. That's like, whoa. I mean, I guess from God's perspective, he really wants people to observe the Sabbath. But death, I think, is maybe, I don't know, it seems, again, a little out there, a little too harsh. And then I'd also like to talk very briefly about Exodus chapter 32, verses 9 through 14. I'm not going to read the whole passage, but it's an interesting passage in that it seems as if Moses is advising God on what to do instead of the other way around. And that's somewhat troubling because it's almost as if Moses in the situation is wiser than God is. And God ends up doing what Moses wants. But then again, all I know is it's odd because it seems like God is behaving like a child, whereas Moses is behaving like a reasonable adult. It's I don't know. It's kind of, I don't know what to think about that passage. It just seems like the roles are not in the proper order. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the passage in the book of Exodus that is the most troubling to me. Exodus chapter 32, verses 27 to 29. So this incident takes place right after the golden calf incident, in which Aaron, Moses' trustee, his pal, his bud, made the golden calf for the people. And instead of Aaron getting punished in this scene takes a very strange, bizarre turn. Because I thought this passage was going to end with Aaron being punished severely by God because Aaron failed to say no to the mob. And since he failed, he ended up making a golden calf, which they worshipped. I was thinking that Aaron, as well as all the other people, would be punished. That's not what happens. What happens is Moses rallies. He said, "Whoever is for the Lord, come to me." And all the Levites rallied to Moses. Okay, but then here's where things get really weird in verse 27. Then he said to them, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Each man is to strap a sword to his side. Go back and forth through the camp from one end to the other, each killing his brother and friend and neighbor." The Levites did as Moses commanded, and that day about 3,000 of the people died. Then Moses said, "You have been set apart to the Lord today, for you were against your own sons and brothers, and he has blessed you this day." Conveniently, my Life Application Bible did not address this passage. I noticed that whenever I come to a particularly egregious passage or a passage that appears to have an egregious meaning to it, my Life Application Bible conveniently doesn't have a footnote for it when it has footnotes for everything else. The only thing I can really say is that this passage, it seems like something you would read about a 21st century cult leader who's out in the woods somewhere, who tells the people you have to kill each other because God's telling me that you need to do this. That's what this seems like. And it seems totally out of character with who God is supposed to be. I mean, remember, the book of Exodus is also where it says, "Thou shalt not murder." And then God commands Moses to command the people to murder each other. It seems like a glaring contradiction to me. If there's anyone out there who understands this better than me and who can make a rational argument for why I am misinterpreting this, please do in the comment section below. But I do not see a way out of this passage being anything but egregious and insane. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, those are my thoughts on the book of Exodus. I thought it was, really good and really kind of not great in some ways. It's nevertheless a compelling book. I do highly recommend that you read it, wrestle with it, try and investigate it. I need to investigate it more than I already have. I've only just begun, but I do highly recommend reading it, obviously, as I highly recommend reading the entire Bible, because it kind of changed the entire world. But anyways, ladies and gentlemen, if you have read the book of Exodus, please let me know in the comment section below your thoughts, everything. Just leave all of that in the comment section below. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, if you liked this video, please like it and subscribe. Tell your friends about the channel. And never forget to